All right, I'm going to commence. Sorry, firstly, my name's Glenn Drew. I'm the CEO of Squiz.com. I'm going to kick off with a video first, and hopefully I can get this up.
Tell you forms follows function or function drives form, you know. No, it follows data. Yeah, the ultimate arbiter is data. So we are in a data world, which then brings another question. You know, data mobility. We talked about data density, data mobility. So why is it so hard, and where does it create value? Now this is a great slide. It's going to take a bit of time to explain. But at its heart, what he's trying to say is that we have it much harder. We shouldn't hit ourselves for not using IT so much. Because if you're going to create value through data mobility, then that data mobility network, that data network matters. What does it look like? Well, you know, a child of 5 can tell you that the one in the middle is very different from all the other ones. Okay? So that is the difference between an automotive and a construction firm. It's there. In financial services, data is highly concentrated, doesn't bridge corporate boundaries, a few plugins and you're good. Look at construction. You have so many entry points. You have so many ways of connecting, so many different points to connect. You're a global operator, but suddenly you have all your local supply chain. We know that. That's what that graph shows. Now, there are 2 ways to deal with that. The first one is to create a company that looks like a financial service or a manufacturing company. Yeah, you industrialize by becoming like an industrialist. That's option 1. Yeah, data mobility creates value through PLM, standard PLM in manufacturing. Let's go PLM and create companies that looks like manufacturing. That's option 1. And it took about 25 years for the automotive companies to restructure their whole supply chain at corporate level, sell, buy, merge, to get to that picture, and it worked. But they are, you know, they are not local. Yeah, I can make a Range Rover in UK, put it on the ship, and send it across the planet. I can't do the same with building. It's not the same thing. So option 2, we're going to have to data mobility work in construction with that map. But now that we know we have that map, yeah, we know we can sort of address it. I'm pleased to...
So that's Elaine Waha from Bureau Happold, and he was presenting at the BMEPOS forum, really setting out the challenge for the built industries when it comes to data. So in my presentation today, I'm going to talk about some of the ways that we're starting to now address this issue, and it really ties into project controls quite nicely. So I'll just flip to my presentation. Okay. First of all, this is my son. We built him a box castle, and he's our customer. You know, what we build today, he's going to be the users of tomorrow. Now, what makes this really sort of vital is building for tomorrow. Building for tomorrow's users is really what we're actually all about. This is what this is intended for. So coming back to just being around the project controls people over the last few days, there's some people that are starting to express some of these key challenges from a project controls point of view, which is really good. Jeff Rea from Turner and Townsend this morning said, turning data into intelligent forms of information is key, and the focal point on this is intelligent. So intelligent data is really the game here. But the lack of good quality data and systems integration does adversely impact the outcomes of a project. Will Guthrie from HKA said, how do we make contracts so people collaborate together? Contracts at the moment are very much around risk and commercial rules. Collaboration kind of doesn't fall into contracts, and that's a big issue, and he sees that that can actually distract from the design intent for a project. He also says we need to simplify the supply chain and resource availability. And then Bill Panay, I think he's here, there he is, right there, from Oricon. He says no one dashboard will fit all the information. And I've actually seen some presentations today where some really, really awesome dashboards are there. But we have to bear in mind that there is no golden dashboard that will do it all. But these dashboards have to tell us whether we're ahead or behind, or over budget or under budget, deal with quality, change management, variation. So there's a lot of work that project controls covers. And ultimately, project controllers manage and deal with early warnings. You know, that's the goal, is to make sure that any projects that are running off the rails, that's picked up and trapped early so we can deal with it. So there's a lot, you know, as we know, it ties into risk management. Okay, so, however, where we come from with the work that I've been doing with the industry is to look at actually an asset-centric point of view. So if the city could speak, or if the buildings could speak, what would they say? If you think about your projects right now, if your projects could talk to you, what would your projects say about what's going on? And, you know, that could be that's a fascinating conversation. So we won't do it right now, but I do encourage you to have a think about this. And this is kind of the central tenet of what we're actually trying to achieve. But let's talk about this idea of smart cities. We want our cities to be smart. Well, there's a you know, from being around this industry for 10 years and looking at all the challenges, how do we create smart cities? Well, we have to bring connected commerce and smart assets together. At the moment, these two are separate, and we'll explain why they are separate. Interconnectivity across public and private contexts, across the connected economy, is absolutely vital for us to achieve smart cities, because again, going back to the user is the ultimate person that we're serving when they're using the assets that have been created. So what is a smart asset? And this is something that we've had to wrestle with as we've worked with the industry. A smart asset is an owned entity that basically, when you talk to an asset manager, they think an asset is a component, which technically they are. They're a component of what we would classify as an owned entity. So as far as we're concerned, a smart asset is actually the thing of interest for us, and the entire data cloud that lives around an asset is a secondary aspect. So the types of smart assets that we have are buildings, infrastructure, and this one emerged just recently is boundaries. So assets sit on top of titles, which sit on overlays, which sit in states, and so on. So smart boundaries are also really relevant. Then we have smart things, so things that move around the world. They're not fixed, they're often in transit, and these are cars and you know, planes and so on, and they ultimately tie into smart transport. Then we have the legals. We have smart contracts, the rules of engagement. So now, not fully understanding the industry and its requirements around this, we've created this Smart City Innovators Roundtable as a private conversation, not a public conversation. Because when you have these discussions in open forums, it gets tricky because we have a lot of commercial boundaries and commercial agreements in play. So we set up the Smart City Innovators Roundtable as a way to invite the industry to talk about some of these core challenges for the industry and come up with solutions and see what that could look like. So the first thing is, this slide needs a slight bit of explanation. This is how a project looks from the eyes of the industry. We have this bucket that is full of resources, people, planners, and you know, cost estimators, engineers, building the asset, creating the asset. And at the top, we have the supply chain that represents the future, everything coming into the asset. And the net, so to speak, in the middle is kind of really where the project controls and project managements and legals and governance will sit. They're basically making sure that what's in the future is coming through the net at the right time. So the net technically could be the project schedule. And as Jeff Rea actually said, the project schedule is actually the real central part of the success of a project, and he's absolutely right. But the difficulty with this model is that at the end of the project, everyone jumps off this out of the bucket. So the ultimate end game is to create the digital built legal environment. I'm involved in some projects around that, particularly with Michael Haynes in that initiative. We want connected smart cities, and we want, there's a lot of buzz around the idea of the circular economy, a lot of reuse, and then there's also a lot of buzz around sustainability and environment. So to achieve this, we kind of have to look at this way that projects happen. Now, there's another collision happening right now, is that smarter ideas are starting to challenge this model. And these ideas from 5D design and management, we're bringing in Internet of Relationships, universal integration and marketplaces, but also this real-time feedback, and I've heard a lot in some of these presentations about the challenges with all the analytics and the overbloat of data and managing that, and ultimately optimized solutions. So the answer really is to try and take this model into a future smart city fabric is actually really tricky. And the really tricky aspect is once everyone jumps out of the bucket, we're left with a bucket of data. And that bucket of data lives on servers all over the place. And it might be all in Amazon or Google Cloud, but there's different owners of all of that data, and that stuff sitting in BIM models and stuff sitting in databases, asset management systems, and so on. So if you disband out of the bucket and you've got all this great asset data, over time the asset data leaks out. And ultimately, this is effectively what erodes the possibility of connected smart cities. And chaos is never far away when we're talking data. Data is king, but it is also its own peril. Now, in the Smart Cities Roundtable, we challenged, in the last session we held in May, we challenged the people there to look at a case study for what they were doing at that time, or something they were dealing with. So this is our CTO, Rowan. He's renovating his kitchen, and that's all of the entities that he had to deal with to renovate his kitchen. And when he went through and explained this, it's just really complex, just to renovate a kitchen. Then another participant presented a case study, and I'm not going to sort of outline which one of these organisations it was, but it was an important case study where they said, if we have a hardware failure at Flinders Street Station, and that hardware failure was just a router, what would be the flow-on effect of all the systems and people in play to deal with that issue? And you can kind of see here that there's a lot of action, but the green circles are people, and there's actually a lot of key people that are involved as well. And that, fundamentally causes a lot of stress, and we've seen the system being stressed. So, there's need for something else. All right, so that's kind of the starting point. Now, this is a discovery activity. You saw that model. We like dealing with simple constructs in software engineering, and then we break those simple constructs into really complex models like that and figure out how to simplify them and bring solutions to the table. So what I'd like you to do with the person next to you, and if you don't have a person next to you, James, who's on their own? We've got you. Who needs a buddy? Maybe if you can make a 3. James, can you come down here and be Bill's buddy, or Bill's making a 3? Great. Yeah. Cool. So we got there, and perfect. Peter, he's coming in. Great. You're just like our, the guy that we just needed at the right time. All right, now this activity is quite simple. What I want you to do for 5 minutes, and we'll time this, so 3:38, I'd like you to think of a workflow between lots of different actors, between people, organisations, external systems and assets. And pick a workflow, whether it's in construct, operations, it doesn't really actually matter, But start drawing circles that represent these people and start connecting lines as to how things are connected. And then, both collaborate on this, and if you like, go for a couple of minutes and then swap over, and then pick another workflow. So your time starts now, go for it. Make as much noise as you like to. Okay, that's it, guys. Just put your pens down. Thanks for having a go. I can see people have drawn quite a few good fancy diagrams. Can you hold them all up? Can I kind of see them? Yep, nice, lovely. Look at how much complexity we just generated, just in 5 minutes. What did you learn from that exercise? Did anyone want to sort of give some feedback? Yep. There's people everywhere. Yes, absolutely. Anything else?
Sometimes there are similar people in more than one camp.
Correct. Yep. And across different camps as well?
Yeah, so
yep.
Might be both in an operational sense, but in a delivery also design
yep.
and user.
Great. Cool. Anything else? Information goes two ways? Yep, absolutely. Yep.
Increasing complexity is business as usual. Yeah.
Increased complexity is business as usual. Yes, absolutely. And it's tangled. And that's what you were alluding to. It's tangled. Yep.
Hard to connect the dots.
It's extremely hard to connect the dots, and like this is why, when I was sitting through some of these presentations, I'm like, I can understand the enormous, in fact, impossible challenge for project controls in some cases. Because
particularly through external systems is going on connect.
Absolutely.
Sometimes simpler to connect people.
It is simpler to connect people. Yeah. And in fact, how many people in this room have worked around the systems to get things done? Right. So, you have to, right? So, exactly. So that's, so if we try and even link all the systems together, we're still working around them. And so the first person said a really key point here is the people. The people are vital in this process. So we went out to, we've been out into various supply chain industries, and we've done exactly this workflow and exercise with them, and we've done the same in construction. And I'll come back to this in a sec. I'll just make sure I've got... actually, no, I'll hold that thought and we'll get to it. Okay, so at the same time, the world is craving a new internet because there's information flying everywhere, and I don't know about you guys, but email is a bit overwhelming these days. And you spend your whole life trawling through emails and responding to messages and making sure people got messages and so on. So, but there's also lots of other values that are emerging around privacy, security, trust, liberty. We still want information to go over lots of different boundaries, but we want it to be in a controlled way. And we also want everything to be real time. So we want those values to work within all these new technologies that are erupting and emerging into the space. So our platform, Squiz, was born out of the idea of creating a globally integrated connected commerce platform to connect automated trade. Now, in 2006, when we started this, we had no idea just how complex this system was going to become, but how liberating it would also turn out to be. But let's start with people. So this diagram is looking at me and my world. And in my world, I have an action framework. I have lots of conversations happening. I'm listening into news and feeds. I've got calendars that's telling me what to do next. I've got lots of workflows in action. And there's also sales. I'm buying and selling stuff all the time. Around that, if you imagine, if you grade your email inbox, if you actually scroll through your 25,000 messages, I think I've got 45,000 in the history, try to organise that. I mean, a lot of people do, they put it into folders and stuff like that, but then try to organise that within the context of what's going on LinkedIn, and then organise it in the context of what's going on Facebook. And then so suddenly we have to now tune into so many different sources of information to see what's going on in our action framework. And then bring in all the software systems, so, BIM 360 and, M2 and so on, and there's a lot going on. So we need to organise this into domains of interest. We need to actually create some spaces where we can bring this data and this information into something that's useful for me to get what I need to get done, both in a personal and private business context. But what we really have is that we're anchored to our devices. I don't know if you've ever been on the plane. I have. Where my laptop, I'm in the middle of doing a presentation, my laptop goes flat. That's it. I've lost my next 45 minutes because the PowerPoint I'm working on is not synchronised with the cloud and so on. And so, I have to go to my other device. So the idea with this is we want to put the devices outside of the spaces framework so it can interact with our world, our environment. So it's device agnostic. And then we're walking into different buildings. So we're walking into buildings, assets. We're here at the MCG. By walking inside the environment, we're asking the environment to respond to us. And so we're getting caught in this kind of tug-of-war between systems trying to help us get through the assets that we're trying to use with lots of different security systems in play, and that can be a bit mind-boggling. And at the end of the day, we've got to do everything we do has got to be legal, so there's a governance framework that sits around us. So that's just people. Then we work with organisations, and I'm not going to go through all of these individually again, but basically an organisation has all its business activities that are going on, so kind of like an action framework. There's an executive that sits around that to execute strategy. There's there's lots and lots of teams of people, and then we're supplying something to the market, so the business is doing something within, again, a governance framework. And finally, we're creating and building and owning assets. And our assets have lots of models. So we have data models, we have BIM models, we have control models, we have schedules. They're all sitting in models. Then we have our team working on the assets. We have those who manage the assets and the supply chain that services the assets and a governance that wraps around assets. Complex? All right, now we want to build a system that does all that. So the answer to that is you can't. You cannot build a system that does all that, but you can build a system that addresses the things that link all of this together. So this is what we did. We basically started out looking at the construction marketplace, and we thought, let's look at just a simple workflow like buying and selling something to bring on site for a project. So we went and talked to about 30, 40 supply chain companies and construction management firms and contractors, and we asked them what systems they run just for financials. And what we have to do is we have to bring all these systems that speak in lots of different languages into a common framework and unify them. So this is what the work we've done is. And the challenge when you start directly linking a system to system, who's here has actually done that? Have you actually tried to integrate like Primavera to your financial system? Has any headaches? Yeah. And any time it crashes, it causes a huge amount of problems? Yeah. So the challenge is when you try to start integrating systems one to the other, you end up in the mess that you've actually just written out. And there's a lot of issues around security, access, all of that. So our goal was to, let's say, we set up organisations like a virtual organisation, you call the organisation avatar, and the organisation can then start connecting with other organisations in a unified framework. And then we can bring in the people, and those people work within those organisations, and we can give them access to different functions. We know those people are professionally connected. Everyone in this room is probably professionally connected in some way. But everybody needs security. We need this to be completely locked down. If we're going to build this as an architecture, it has to be absolutely secure, and I mean everything secure. So this was the challenge that we undertook, not really knowing in 2006 what we were trying to do. And by 2016, we were very clear, and we stood up this platform to do this. Now, when we started working on this, and we basically have now got integrated procurement and sales orders and purchase orders can flow and invoices flow back, and all of this works beautifully in a unified sense. We ran and collided into the built industries. Some of our clients were suppliers in construction, and they said, well, we want this for our business. So we did some case studies with some of the tier ones and tier twos, and we started to discover some real critical issues. And the issues centred around this slide. So if I take what I just showed you from a 2D perspective, the bottom, which is people and organisations, is exactly what that last map was all about. But in a social business network, we need to make sure that everyone and everything is encrypted. So we created what we would call an encrypted social business network. And every sort of entity here is what we would classify as an encrypted vault. And inside encrypted vaults, when you start making connections with others in the matrix, you share encrypted tokens so that basically your vault is connected to all the other vaults that you can connect with across all sorts of different organisations. And then the systems of organisations need to come into play as well. So we had to create a way so that the systems, the external systems, can bolt into that organisation vault. So that, because we got a lot of resistance from companies that say, well, hang on, if I'm going to expose business data that's private into a public framework, how do you protect that? And we said, well, you put your vault key inside that encrypted link and only your software can talk into that vault. And we as system operators and hosts of this, we can't get into those vaults. We can't hack them, they're your vaults. Then we realised that organisations, like in this industry, they cluster together inside marketplaces. So there's lots of marketplaces. The HVAC marketplace, structural, project controls is a marketplace. This is where there's private clusters of information flowing at a more marketplace level. Tender information, contract pricing, all of that is aggregated into marketplaces. And ultimately, what we realised is that a major tier one will have like 400 projects underway, and those projects have their own integrated supply chain, so the assets have to bolt into this matrix. So this is kind of where our work led us to discover that we have to give assets, this smart asset concept, an ID. If we can build an ID for a smart asset, we can start now bolting information to it and relationships to it. And if we can start bolting relationships to it, through those relationships we can open up the gates to share data and pass data around without having to worry about end-to-end systems. So this is what we call the Internet of Relationships. And it's a very powerful data structure and one that we're slowly introducing to this industry, but it's going to take some heavy lifting to make sure we get these smart assets right. So that diagram that you've done, this is what we did when we modelled this in one of the construction supply chains. We looked at a construction supplier, how they order off their customers, that we call them a member, but that's just their language, how they bolt into marketplaces, they're linked to pricing contracts, those pricing contracts govern what prices they pay based on those things. And when we did this, this was 3 years ago, we started to look at systems like Revit and M2 and Maximo and all sorts of other things. And we realised that the key thing that was missing is all the workflow that flows through the assets. So we had to simplify our model, or actually add complexity, but by adding some complexity, the outcome is simpler. We needed a way so that, I think I've got laser pointer on this. Okay, so we needed a way so that the owner of an asset can then assign rights to an operator, this is Kavanagh Industries, but it could be anyone, that is allowed to query the building model. And when they query the building model, they can pull out a quantity schedule and push it through the integrated supply chain to go get it priced. And so say they wanted to reorder a part, they can go through, push this into Holyoke, basically will run through the product catalogue pricing algorithm and figure out what the price is for Kavanagh Industries based on the rights that they've granted on that asset. So this kind of gives you an idea. I'm not going to, in the interest of time, I've only got about 4 minutes left, but we worked through this simple workflow, how you go into Revit. We built a Revit plugin that did it. It basically rolled through the schedule, rolled up all the quantities, and it searched out all of the parameterized data, so we actually had quantities against it. Then we pushed it as a quote into the integrated supply chain, goes across to Holyoke. Holyoke gets a sales notification in Squiz, an RFQ for that asset. Holyoke bring it up. They've even said, Glenn, we just want it to throw back the price. We don't even want to, if we've got a contractual arrangement in with that customer, we just want to throw back the quote, just let it go. So in some cases they might not, but that's sort of their goal. And that's really just a very basic workflow and to show you how to actually generate a quote and have it come back. And that could be any system talking to any system at the other end. So we create that pathway. So I guess what's the takeaways from this? We're going to release the Smart Asset Spec version 1. We're also going to submit this to VDAS because they've just released a beautiful 500-page outline for how the industry should adopt BIM workflows, and I think it's actually a really good step, and they've asked the industry to respond, and so we're responding, and we think the smart asset specification will be very vital. And we're designing this so that any system in the world can create a smart asset. So it's not a case that this is something that Squiz is. This is our gift to the industry, but we want it so that we don't have to have a central authority to issue smart asset IDs, so that we can just start bolting data to smart assets and having all the asset data flow through the gates. So we just want it for our purposes, but we thought we'd release it. Project controls, I think, will drive connected commerce and smart assets, and we're already having conversations here with design contractors getting their heads around this. What we're trying to do is not say we're dictating how business should be done. In fact, we're trying to say, how do you want to harness this model or this integrated supply chain for doing your work better? And it's very embracing because it's all it's API driven and in platform and out of platform driven. So there's lots of options. Just like you did, you developed an asset-centric case study. There's thousands, if not millions, of asset-centric case studies, and every business will do things differently. So we're not trying to restrict anyone. We're actually trying to liberate them and make sure that this smart asset specification is as broad as it can be. Data liquidity, this is a really important point. Data liquidity will ease the resource demand burden. I've seen some pretty interesting graphs of just what the next 5 years in construction looks like, and it's just full on. And there's already responses saying that the supply chains are under stress, that we don't have enough concrete, for instance, and there's not enough expertise. There's not enough people. They're already busy on other projects. So as we increase data liquidity, we'll release ourselves from resource burden. And I see that this is a very vital thing, a vital next step for the next 10 years of construction. In 2020, just for what we're doing, is we'll be onboarding the built industries. So we're going to develop and integrate the smart asset specification into the platform so that any organisation can set up smart assets and then set ownership structures around that, and provide other organisations the opportunity to connect and then set data sharing policies and so on. So just listen out for that. You can tune into Squiz. You can register and log into Squiz so you can get a sense of what we're doing. And we're also working with early adopter projects. So if you have specific projects that you want to try and test this with, I'm more than happy to catch up with you and talk to you about that. And we also do workshops to actually look at this model and explore how this model could work inside a specific case study. So thank you. You can actually register and connect with me on Squiz. Squiz has invite codes. Again, that's my Vault code. So if you want to connect with me, you can just enter that in the sign up page. There's my phone number there and email address if you do want to get in touch. And thank you very much. And I hope you enjoyed this session.